Hello everyone, I'm George from Ireland. Welcome back to my channel once more. Well, the Russian Federation has agreed to this 30-day convention whereby they shan't strike any Ukrainian energy infrastructure. The Ukrainians won't do the same to them. So not destroying oil refineries, power stations, and so forth. Russia been doing this from early in the war, partly because the Ukrainian railways rely on electricity, also to crush Ukrainian civilian morale, freeze them to death, particularly babies, geriatrics, people in hospital, things like that. It was a very, very cruel, indiscriminate tactic. Now, the Ukrainians hit back at oil refineries and so on to hurt the Russian economy. One thing is almost impossible to defend against strikes of the energy infrastructure. Therefore, attack was the best form of defense. Well, if you're going to do it to us, we'll do it to you. So Putin doesn't want a ceasefire, and he hasn't agreed to ceasefire. There's simply a convention not to hit energy infrastructure. Other sort of fighting can carry on. They can hit any other targets. They can be fighting on the ground, in the air, at sea, and so on. They can move forward and everything. But he therefore has got even more munitions to use against military targets and other things. So did the Ukrainians, of course. Now, he's agreed it partly because the Ukrainians are hurting him, hitting Astrakhan, hitting further and further away. And that's bad for his economy. Export of oil and gas. Well, the cruciality of that to the Russian economy can scarcely be overstated. And it's obviously a bit demoralizing for the Russians as well. He's done it because he doesn't want to be hurt so much. Moreover, if he refuses, that might infuriate Donald J. Trump. And there've been peace feelers put out. Obviously, the United States not fighting, but they're the armorer, and to some extent, they were the treasurer of the Ukrainians. That they look like they cut off the Ukrainians for a while, then they're back in somewhat. But Trump's tactic is, if you don't give me what I want, they'll be held to pay. I'll give the Ukrainians so much, which I don't believe actually, partly because the Congress would have to vote it. But Putin doesn't want to take that risk. Um, so that's why he's giving Trump something, and Trump can sell this as a success. But overall, Putin doesn't want a ceasefire at the moment because he thought the war started to go reasonably well, higher casualties to put them in a relatively strong position from which to negotiate. Remember how Donald Trump was going to bring peace within 24 hours? It's been 58 days. A promise made, a promise broken, something he couldn't possibly fulfill. He's overpromised as usual, he's underperformed, he has lied, and his stupid supporters still trust him. Wow, you'd have to be staggeringly thick to believe a word he says. But there we go. It's a bit like someone who trusts Putin, and so Trump is one of those who's dim enough to trust Putin. So Putin, he thinks the war is going quite well. Started to gain more ground in the last month or so. It's going to get more difficult. Well, partly because it's getting very muddy. But if you can sustain this tempo to say May, the ground will have dried out. That'll be prime campaigning season. Thinking that the Ukraine's on the brink of collapse. So long to squeeze out these last places. Finally, the Russians have just about pushed them out the whole of Kursk region, that area of the Russian Federation that the Ukrainians were able to seize last August. So that is a success, a very belated, very costly success for Russia. Withdraw all military aid, financial aid from the Ukrainians, and that might lead to really an implosion of Ukrainian morale, but it hasn't happened, partly because the Americans seem to have been assuaged by what Zelensky has said, the supposed minerals deal. European Union countries have stepped up support. Infrastructure is conditional on Ukraine not mobilizing or rearming. I think those who come up to conscription age not to be called up, and no more arms shipments across the border. Are the Ukrainians going to stick to that? I don't know. Maybe not, because we know Putin will break it. I think obviously you see they've broke it, and he'll say, "No, it wasn't me. It was an explosion at their power plant," or something like that. Or towards the end, could false accuse the Ukrainians of doing something wrong, and therefore he can end the ceasefire on some massive salvo everywhere. But for the moment, Putin would want to keep it going as it's going reasonably well on the ground for him, and he thinks he more or less got Trump on his side. He thought he demoralized and divided European countries. Is not quite true. The neo-Nazis and the communists, they're on his side. Surprise, surprise, because he's cut from the same cloth as them. But the middle ground is not, which for the moment, fortunately, is holding. But if we come to this time next year, I think at that point Putin really might want a ceasefire, and he's caught between a rock and a hard place because the real ultra nationalist headbangers and militarists, they don't want a ceasefire. They think that's being a wimp, and he doesn't want to face something like he did in June 2023. You know, Midsummer's Day, Yevgeny Prigozhin's attempted putsch. Would that happen against him for? You know, being a cop out for not fighting to the finish. The trouble is, he's you know, he's he who rides a tiger. You end up inside. You've let out this genie of this farouche jingoism and what's the word? That distasteful hyper nationalism, chauvinism, and then he can't really control it. All these mill bloggers saying that we've got to absolutely annihilate the Ukrainians, and then so anything short of his maximalist goals will be seen as treason. But you know, that's a minority. Maybe like 20% of Russians are like that. There's the muddled middle, some sort of silent majority who don't oppose it, who just go along with it. They reap some sort of financial benefit. They would quite welcome a ceasefire because Russia has gained some territory. They haven't really weakened Ukraine. They may have wrecked a lot of its cities, but Ukraine is better armed than ever it was before. Zelensky won't be there forever. He might agree to go another election, which obviously Russia try to interfere, bring to office a pro-Putin candidate. I don't think that would work. Because you know, no matter how much they try to rig it, you can just do these things by paper ballots, and that's very, very difficult to falsify in any significant scale. And obviously, people wouldn't be allowed to vote in the illegally Russian occupied areas. People would say, "Oh, that doesn't count then." But the Ukrainians have done that for a long time because obviously you can't control the election there. Putin would control the election. So because he's such an imbecile, because before 20,000 to 2014, a significant minority of Ukrainians were Moscow inclined, up to 30%, and them in a good election, especially a bit of cheating, and forming an alliance with another group could even have the majority. And there were some Russian aligned governments in Ukraine sometimes, but that's never going to happen now because the most Moscow inclined areas are now under his illegal occupation, like Moscow and most of the regions of Lugansk, Donetsk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia. So they can't participate. And that's been sort of effectively lost to Ukraine. Okay, again for Russia in a sense, but there's not going to be a pro-Moscow government in Kiev ever again. So you want to achieve as much success as you can this year because next year the economic cost would just be so high that he probably really can't sustain it as a full-scale war. Might go back to what there was between, say, 2014 2022, is a much lower intensity conflict, occasional sniping, some shelling, not any major attempts to gain ground. Right, thank you for watching my channel. Make sure you subscribe on Patreon, donate to PayPal, georgecallahan79@gmail.com. Toodle pip.